Rather than admit a mistake and say, let's go back and try this thing again, it's always, no, we're trying to do the right thing, and that's what counts, and we'll figure out eventually somehow. FDR, even before he was president, spoke of bold, persistent experimentation. But experimentation seems to clearly imply experiments that don't work out will be set aside. But that's not the way we can say 80 years in now that liberal governance tends to work.
Now, at this point, I will caution the viewer to send the children to bed and prepare yourself to be shocked. One of the chapters in your book deals with what you call, forthrightly, liberal bullshit. A term which you make into a kind of term of art in this chapter. What's that all about? What do you mean by bullshit, first of all?
Well, if there had been a gentler way to make the point fully, I would have chosen it. But I couldn't really come up with any. Here's the point.
What is it, first of all?
It derives from the analysis in a slender little book. It's really just a journal article that placed between covers by Harry Frankfurt. The book is titled On Bullshit. He is a now emeritus philosophy professor at Princeton. And his book is an attempt to make sense of this concept. This is a term that's used to vigorously dismiss someone else's observations. But he said it's not simply a way of saying that somebody else has said something that's factually wrong, or even that someone has told a lie. He said, in a sense, bullshit is worse than lying. The liar, at least, acknowledges the authority of the idea of telling the truth. He's not opposed to telling the truth in general. He simply wants to carve out an exemption for himself in this particular instance. And he can only be believed by people who also accept that truth-telling matters. The bullshitter, by contrast, doesn't recognize the authority of truth as a standard. Frankfurt's argument is that the problem with bullshit is not that it's false, but that it's phony, and that the bullshitter is engaged in.
But to be clear, it's both. It's false and funny.
Or
is it phony, or is it
no,
just?
In fact,
can it be just phony and
that's
not false?
Right. Because strangely enough, bullshit can be true. Because according to Frankfurt, what bullshit is about is not giving an account of objective reality, but of conveying subjective intentions, where it is judged by the criterion of sincerity rather than accuracy. And so it's a way of expressing how I really feel. Now, so it could be that things that are sort of by happenstance factually correct come in the service of that, but the bullshitter doesn't really care whether what he says is true or false. And that's, according to Frankfurt, the great transgression in that the person who engages in it encourages his listeners and sort of brings them into a discourse regime where being accurate or being accurately representing the objective reality just doesn't matter. We're simply talking about how we feel, and this is a very sort of touchy-feely modern thing. Frankfurt's analysis is confined to descriptive statements. I take it, and I don't know what his politics are, if any, so I don't mean to imply that...
What's an example of a descriptive statement?
Well, he gives an example of a 4th of July orator going on bombastically about the glories of the past and the way God informed the work of the founding fathers. He said, this person is probably not really trying to give us a historical representation, but is mostly concerned with conveying to his audience that he, the speaker, is a person who is patriotic, religiously devout, takes the future of the country very seriously. So, I mean, this is an example of something where the truthiness of the claims is secondary to the internal sort of emotional truths that are trying to be
But that's
conveyed.
sort of an example of conservative BS.
Yes, there's sadly no monopoly on this.
Now, so how does BS become elevated to be part of the liberal creed?
Yes. Frankfurt talks about descriptive statements. He does not talk about prescriptive statements, which are the bread and butter of politics.
Right.
We have this problem, we'll create this program or pass this law, it'll solve that problem. But prescription seems to require judgment, not by the standard we use for descriptive statements, accuracy, but by the standard we use for sort of empirical reality, which is efficacy. If we enact this program, if we pass this law, it really will solve the problem. And if it doesn't, we'll try something else, or we'll revise the law, or change the program, or cancel the program. My contention is that liberal bullshit consists of blithe and sort of weird indifference to the question of whether the liberal project actually does all that much good. Mitch Daniels, the former governor of Indiana, gave an interview to our friend and Lincoln Fellow Mark Hemingway for National Review magazine. This was about 4 or 5 years ago now. And Daniels said, in my capacity as governor of this state, my approach has been that measured, provable performance of government programs is absolutely essential. And that, he said, this should be a philosophically neutral objective. If you're a typical conservative who wants the government to throw nickels around like they were manhole covers, then it's obvious that you want government to be lean and mean, you know. But he said, Daniel said, I say to my liberal friends, you ought to be the most concerned of anybody if it turns out that a dollar that could be helping a poor person in some way is being squandered. And he said, slyly, and some of them actually agree, which meaning a lot of them don't agree. And I think it's clear that a lot of liberals do not, in fact, agree with us, or it's not that they reject it, but that they don't even sort of consider it. To go back to the book we were discussing, Never Enough, one thing I did there was to try to quantify what the American welfare state is. And I do so by using what the Office of Management and Budget calls human resources programs. Social Security, other income support programs, Medicare, other health programs, federal programs in education and social services and job training. That's pretty much what the federal government does now. In fiscal year 2013, outlays on that segment of the federal budget amounted to $2,200 $79 billion, I think, if I remember correctly, which is a lot of money. It's about 2/3 of all federal outlays in the most recent fiscal year. It's about 1/7 of the GDP. It's about $7,200 per American, including many who are not poor. If one would think that if, by their own description, liberals are people who get up every morning thinking about all the suffering in the world and how imperative it is to alleviate it, that their primary focus would be, how can we make this vast apparatus that we've built function optimally? But it doesn't seem to be the case. The focus instead is on making it bigger, on adding new programs, new funding for existing ones, rather than asking in a rigorous, insistent way whether what we're already doing, we're doing well enough in a targeted, efficacious way.
And you don't attribute this to fatalism. That is, I mean, it's not that liberals say, you know, man is a flawed creature.
Yes.
You know, reform programs are not going to work very well, but we have an obligation to try anyway. This is BS.
Fatalism is for conservatives, I think. Yes, about recognizing limits. And no, I think for liberals, and this is where I think.
Is it that they don't care what the results are, or that it doesn't matter?
I think it's the dogma of compassion that makes liberal bullshit possible and even inevitable in a way. If under compassion, I now have a self-regarding reason to care about your suffering, there's a constant danger to which liberalism frequently succumbs to define a success when I feel better rather than when you are better. So we pass a program, we see a problem, we pass a program, we look at the program and say, by God, we're doing something. We must be pretty good people after all. And what ought to, according to the logic, seem like the primary concern, whether the ostensible beneficiary of the project really has been left better off, sort of gets lost in the shuffle. The key thing is, we have validated the idea of ourselves as good, caring, engaged, morally engaged people. And whether the suffering is alleviated, whether the people who suffer are suffering less or have a more promising life ahead of them,
And is it your diagnosis that liberals are self-conscious about this? That is, they know that they don't really care about the effectiveness of the programs they urge upon us? Or are they clueless completely? I mean, they don't even know that they don't care. They don't know what it would be to evaluate. I mean, you find them, I take it, guilty of indifference, not simply clueless.
I think they
or some combination thereof.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? But I think that for the most part, they do not ever say to themselves, who cares if it works, as long as it shows that we're nice people. I think instead, the path of least resistance is to simply assume that if you're trying to do something, eventually, somehow, someday, something good will come out of it. And that it's best to be judged by the intensity of one's efforts rather than the results of those efforts. So I don't think that I don't think that many liberals really answer the question because they never really ask it of themselves. Wait a minute, is this thing actually working? Is it doing any good? And in the sort of thick of the political scrum, they are particularly reluctant to give any aid and comfort to the conservative enemy by saying, you know what, you're right, Head Start really hasn't helped that many kids. We've spent these billions of dollars over nearly half a century, and the most rigorous studies show that the typical kid who goes through is at exactly the same point after 1 year in school as the ones who don't go to school through the program. So maybe this program can't be made to work, or maybe it needs to be blown up and reconfigured. To say all of that, sort of license the glee it would cause conservatives is simply unthinkable. So rather than admit a mistake and say, let's go back and try this thing again, it's always, no, we're trying to do the right thing, and that's what counts, and we'll figure out eventually somehow. FDR, even before he was president, spoke of bold, persistent experimentation. But experimentation seems to clearly imply experiments that don't work out will be set aside. But that's not the way we can say 80 years in now that liberal governance tends to work. Experiments that are well-intentioned tend to keep going on the basis of their good intentions.
Right. Or as Joe Biden famously said on the passage of Obamacare, this is a big effing deal.
That's right.